The sun burned low over Dry Creek, that small, forgotten town where dust ruled the streets and silence had more weight than words. Out on the far ridge, where the soil cracked like old leather, stood a lonely cabin. Smoke curled weakly from its chimney, but there was no warmth inside. Martha Riggins stood by the window, hands trembling as she folded a torn baby dress. Her lip was split again. She could taste the iron in her blood. The man who had once promised her love now gave her only bruises and blame. Eli Riggins had been a strong man once, the kind who could rope a steer with one hand and build a fence with the other. But the land broke him, then whiskey finished the job. Each drought made him meaner, each failed crop a reminder that he wasn't the man he used to be. He wanted sons, strong sons, to carry his name. But the heavens, it seemed, delighted in mocking him. 3 times Martha had gone through the pain of childbirth, and 3 times the cries that filled the cabin were the cries of little girls. When the 3rd was born, "He didn't even come inside. You've cursed me, woman," he'd spat, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. Now, years later, those words still echoed in her bones. Her oldest daughter, Mary, was 8. Quiet, sharp-eyed, already too grown for her age. The younger Clara, only 5, still had that fragile hope in her smile that Martha prayed wouldn't fade too soon. Martha tried to hide the truth from them. The bruises, the fear, the long nights when Eli's voice rose like thunder. But children know. They always know. That morning, Eli had ridden into town to drink away the few dollars left from selling a calf. Martha used those rare hours of peace to wash her daughter's clothes, patch their shoes, and whisper the words she'd nearly forgotten how to say. "It'll be all right. My loves," she said softly as she brushed Clara's hair. "Someday things will be different." But even as she spoke, her voice cracked on the word someday. The stranger from Dust Valley. By the time the noon sun glared down, a lone rider appeared at the horizon. His horse was a pale bay, its coat streaked with dust, and the man atop it rode with the weary patience of someone who'd seen too much loss. Thomas Hale, the widowed cowboy, was known in the territories, though not by name. Folks spoke of a quiet drifter who'd once owned a ranch near San Angelo, who'd buried his wife and son after the fever took them both, and who hadn't stayed anywhere long since. He wasn't looking for trouble, just work and a place to rest his soul. When he rode into Dry Creek, the town looked half dead. A saloon leaning to one side, a general store with broken shutters, a church bell cracked in half. Still, it was shelter. He stopped outside the Dry Creek trading post, and that's when he saw her. Martha stood at the counter, clutching a sack of flour like it might save her life. Her hands were thin and trembling, and the edge of a bruise colored her cheekbone faintly purple. Behind her skirts, 2 little girls peeked out, silent, wide-eyed. "Beautiful." Thomas removed his hat, offered a polite nod. "Ma'am," she startled, then nodded back, eyes down. Her voice was quiet when she thanked the shopkeeper and turned to leave. The way she moved, careful, cautious, as if the air itself might strike her, made something twist inside Thomas. He'd seen that kind of fear before, the kind that doesn't come from a single beating, but from years of believing you deserve it. He watched her lead the girls down the street, her shoulders stiff under the weight of survival. He told himself it was none of his business. But that night, as he bedded down in the stable behind the saloon, he couldn't shake the image of her eyes, hollow, but still burning with some fragile ember of hope. Whispers of Dry Creek in Dry Creek, talk spread faster than the wind. By the 2nd day, Thomas had heard the stories. "Eli Riggins," said Jeb Tanner, the barkeep, polishing a glass. "Meanest son of a gun in 3 counties. Drinks more'n he works. Poor wife's tougher than boot leather for staying with him." Thomas didn't reply. He wasn't one to gossip, but the words sat heavy on his chest. That evening, he went out to the edge of town to mend fences for old Mrs. Connors, who paid him with supper and a bed of hay. From the ridge, he could see the Riggins cabin, small, crooked, a thin trail of smoke curling into the darkening sky. He saw movement, Martha, hanging laundry. The 2 girls playing quietly nearby. When one of them laughed, a sound too rare and too sweet for that place, it made him smile. Then, from inside the cabin, came a crash. A man's shout. Martha froze, the sheet slipping from her hands. The girls ran to her. Thomas clenched his fists. Every instinct told him to ride up there, but he stayed rooted. He'd promised himself he was done interfering in other people's pain. The world didn't thank men for playing hero. It buried them. Still, long after the shouting stopped, he stood on that ridge, staring at the dark cabin, feeling the weight of his own silence. The long night days passed, then weeks. Martha avoided town whenever she could. When she did come, she spoke little, her eyes scanning corners as if expecting him, Eli, to appear from the shadows. But there were moments of light. One afternoon, while Thomas repaired a broken cartwheel outside the smithy, Mary came by leading her little sister. She looked up shyly. "Mama says thank you for fixing our fence last week." He smiled gently. "Wasn't nothing, miss. Just didn't want your goats running loose." Mary's eyes brightened. "Mama says you're kind. Most folks just look away." Thomas paused, his throat tightening. "Sometimes looking away's easier," he said. The girl nodded solemnly, as if understanding more than a child should. Then she whispered, "Mama cries at night when she thinks we're sleeping." Before he could answer, she turned and ran off with her sister. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat outside his small cabin, watching the moonlight roll over the plains. Somewhere out there, a woman cried quietly into her pillow, believing no one cared, and somewhere deep in his heart, a promise began to form, a promise he hadn't spoken yet but already meant. "If the world won't protect her, I will." The wind came first, low and mournful, whispering across the plains like a ghost searching for peace. The sky darkened fast, rolling with black clouds that swallowed the sun whole. Inside the Riggins cabin, Martha moved quickly. She gathered her daughters close, shuttered the windows, and whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. "Will Pa come home, Mama?" Mary asked softly. Martha hesitated, her hand tightening on the window latch. "He'll come," she said, voice trembling. "He always comes." But this time she wished he wouldn't. Out on the edge of town, Thomas Hale looked up from the corral he was mending. He could smell rain, sharp and electric, carried on the wind. In the distance, lightning flashed, and for a split second, he thought he saw something on the horizon, a rider, fast, reckless. He didn't need a name to know who it was. The return of Eli Riggins. Eli burst through the cabin door, half drunk, soaked to the bone. His boots slammed against the wood floor as thunder cracked overhead. "Where's my supper?" he snarled, tossing his hat aside. "You sitting here while I ride through hell?" Martha stepped back.
"There's stew on the stove," she whispered.
"The girls are hungry. I didn't ask about them brats." He grabbed her wrist, yanking her forward. The stew spilled, steam rising like ghostly smoke between them. "Martha." His eyes burned red from drink. "You think you can shame me?" "Whole town looking at me like I'm cursed. All 'cause you can't bear me a son." "Eli, please." His slap came before the words finished. The sound cracked louder than thunder. Mary screamed. Clara ran to her mother's side. Eli turned, belt in hand, fury blinding him. "You want to defy me too, girl?" But before the belt could fall, the door crashed open. The man who wouldn't look away. Lightning lit the figure in the doorway. Thomas Hale. Rain pouring down his coat, eyes cold as iron. "That's enough." "Riggins." Eli staggered back, blinking. "You," he spat. "You think you can waltz into my home?" "It stopped being your home the moment you raised a hand to them." Thomas stepped forward slowly, every word deliberate. "Leave now, Eli. Go far. Don't come back." Eli's laughter came rough, bitter. "She's mine, Cowboy, my wife, my property." Thomas's jaw clenched. "No man owns another soul." Eli swung the belt toward him, but Thomas caught it midair, yanked hard, and drove his fist into Eli's chest. The man stumbled, crashed into the table, and hit the ground. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, silence. Martha knelt beside her girls, her breath shaking. Thomas stood still, chest heaving, eyes locked on Eli, making sure he wouldn't rise again. Finally, Thomas turned to her. "You're safe now." Martha's lip trembled. "No one's ever said that to me before." The long night. They stayed awake until dawn. Thomas helped patch a broken window, built a fire, and made coffee while Martha sat with her children wrapped in blankets. "Why did you come?" she asked quietly, staring into the flames. He shrugged, staring at the floor. Heard the shouting through the storm. Couldn't sleep knowing someone was in trouble. She looked at him for a long time. "You could have been killed." Thomas met her eyes. "Some things are worth the risk." When the sheriff arrived the next morning, Eli was gone. slipped away before dawn, leaving behind only empty bottles and bitterness. He won't go far, the sheriff muttered. But if he does come back, we'll be ready. Thomas stayed until the sheriff left, then lingered by the door. You got family anywhere, ma'am? Martha shook her head. Just me and the girls. He nodded slowly. Then you ain't alone anymore. The days after life, after violence, doesn't heal overnight. It rebuilds itself, quietly, piece by piece. Thomas fixed what he could, the door, the roof, the fence. Martha worked the garden again, her hands raw but steady. The girls smiled more, laughed even. Every evening he'd bring them firewood or help with the animals. And though he never said it outright, the cabin began to feel like something sacred, a small corner of peace carved out of a cruel world. One afternoon, Clara handed him a drawing she'd made on torn paper. A big man with a hat, standing beside 3 smiling faces. That's you, she said proudly. You saved us. Thomas knelt, eyes soft. No, sweetheart. You saved yourselves. I just showed up. Martha stood by the door watching the scene quietly. Something inside her, a thing she thought was long dead, stirred again. Hope. The letter from the past weeks later, a rider brought word from the next town over. Eli Riggins had been seen, drunk, broke, talking vengeance. Thomas read the letter in silence, jaw tight. He knew what that meant. Some men can't live with losing control. That night, he cleaned his revolver, saddled his horse, and left a note on Martha's table. Don't be afraid. He won't trouble you again. The showdown. The canyon was quiet except for the wind and the creak of saddle leather. Eli stepped out from behind a rock, pistol raised, hatred burning through the liquor on his breath. You took everything from me, he hissed. My wife, my land, my pride. Thomas didn't flinch. You threw it all away yourself, Eli sneered. You think you can steal what's mine and live? He fired first. The bullet grazed Thomas's shoulder, spinning him sideways. Pain seared, but he stayed standing. He raised his gun, slow, steady, final. One shot. Eli staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief, before falling into the dust. The desert wind swallowed his last breath. Thomas stood over him for a long moment. No man owns another soul, he said again. Softer this time. Then he turned his horse toward home. The dawn. After darkness. When Martha opened the door the next morning, Thomas stood there, pale and bleeding, hat in hand. Her gasp broke the silence. You're hurt, just a graze, he said. It's done. He won't come back. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear this time, but release. Years of terror washed away in one breath. She guided him inside, tending his wound with gentle hands. Neither spoke much. The fire crackled between them, and outside the rain began to ease. After a while, she said softly, You risked your life for someone you barely know. Thomas looked up, weary but sincere. I know enough. You and them girls deserve better than what this world gave you. Her lip quivered. And if I don't know how to start again? He reached for her hand. Then start small. I'll help. The rains finally stopped. The land of Dry Creek, once cracked and lifeless, now shimmered under the spring sun. Wildflowers crept up through the mud like small miracles. For the first time in years, Martha woke to birdsong instead of shouting. Thomas Hale stayed close those weeks. He mended fences, helped plow new soil, and taught Mary how to ride bareback. Clara followed him everywhere, calling him Mr. Cowboy, her laughter ringing across the fields. Sometimes Martha would stand on the porch, arms crossed, watching the 3 of them. It didn't feel real. For so long, her life had been measured in fear and survival. Now it was quiet, safe, gentle, but peace, she learned, is something you must learn to accept as much as fight for. The weight of freedom one evening. As the sun dipped behind the ridge, Martha set down her basket of laundry and turned to Thomas. You fixed every board in this place, Mr. Hale, she said softly. If you keep going, there won't be nothing left for me to do. He smiled faintly. Guess I'm not used to sitting still. Maybe you should try, she teased. Though her tone carried warmth she hadn't felt in years. Thomas looked toward the horizon, the light catching the scar along his jaw. When you lose everything, ma'am, work's all that keeps your hands from shaking. Martha hesitated. Do they still shake? Not as much since I met you and the girls. She turned away quickly, hiding her smile. The wind caught her hair and lifted it like a whisper. For the first time, she didn't feel small when a man spoke to her. She felt seen. Rebuilding what was broken that summer, they worked the land together. The girls helped in the garden while Thomas built a new corral and taught them how to handle the horses. Mary, ever the quiet thinker, took to reading. Thomas had brought her a small Bible and a few old books from town. Clara preferred the outdoors, following Thomas like a shadow. One afternoon, Martha found him teaching Clara how to throw a lasso. The child laughed every time she missed, and he'd crouch down, patient and kind, showing her how to aim. Martha stood by the fence, heart swelling at the sight. When he noticed her watching, Thomas tipped his hat. "She's got spirit, that one," Martha smiled. "She got that from me." "Then I pity the man who tries to break her," he said, grinning. Something unspoken passed between them then, something tender, fragile, but alive. The town's eyes in Dry Creek. Tongues wagged again, as they always did. "Widowed cowboy staying with the Riggins woman," they whispered at the saloon. "Ain't proper." But the sheriff, who'd seen too much evil to care for gossip, only said, "She's safe." That's more than she's been in years. When Thomas heard the talk, he didn't flinch. He'd faced gunfire and grief. He could face small mines. Still, he kept his distance enough to give her dignity. He never stayed the night at her cabin, always riding back to his own after sundown. But every morning, without fail, he returned with supplies or tools, pretending it was just neighborly help. The truth was something both he and Martha understood. Sometimes, love grows quietly, too slow for gossip to see, but strong enough to outlast it. The question one cool autumn evening. Thomas arrived carrying a carved wooden box. He set it on the porch rail and opened it to reveal a small, hand-built toy horse. "For Clara," he said shyly. "And a book for Mary, about strong women who didn't let men tell them who to be." Martha's voice softened. "You think a lot about them, don't you? My girls. They remind me what good looks like in this world," he said. Then, almost as if afraid of his own words, he took off his hat and said quietly, "I've been thinking, Martha, you and them girls deserve a steady hand around here. Someone who ain't just fixing fences but sticking around to see the flowers bloom." She looked at him long and hard, her eyes searching his. "You mean to ask something, Thomas?" "I reckon I am," he said, voice steady but soft. "Not out of pity, not out of saving. I've had enough ghosts to last me a lifetime. I just want to build something real again with you." Martha's breath caught. "And if I say yes?" He smiled faintly. "Then we start over, together. You teach me how to live again. And I'll raise them girls proud, same as you've been doing." Tears welled in her eyes. But this time they weren't born of pain. They were freedom made visible. "Then raise them proud, Thomas Hale," she whispered. "And stay this time." He reached out, took her hand, and for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. The years that followed. Time has a way of healing when love tends the soil. The farm grew. So did the children. The house that once echoed with fear now rang with laughter, music, and the smell of warm bread. Mary became a school teacher in town, teaching other girls that knowledge was a kind of power no man could take. Clara grew wild and fearless, breaking horses and hearts alike, her father's steady hands guiding her every step. Thomas and Martha never left Dry Creek. Together, they built something stronger than land, something made of trust, patience, and forgiveness. Sometimes people still whispered, but by then it didn't matter. The whispers couldn't reach the place where their hearts lived. Epilogue, 10 years later, the Dry Creek harvest. Fair shimmered under a golden sky. Horses lined the fences, ribbons fluttered, children laughed. At the center of it all stood a man with silver in his hair and warmth in his eyes. Thomas Hale watched proudly as his daughters, Mary and Clara Hale now, presented their prize-winning horses. The crowd cheered and Martha stood beside him, her face radiant with pride. A small boy ran toward them, their son, born years after the storm. He carried a blue ribbon in one hand, shouting, "Pa! We won first place!" Thomas lifted him high into the air. "That's my boy!" Martha smiled, eyes wet. "You did what you said you would, Thomas. You raised them proud." He looked at her, then at the 3 children before them. The daughters who had once been beaten for being born, and the son who learned strength from their gentleness. "I didn't just raise them proud," Thomas said quietly. They raised me whole. Martha leaned into him as the sun melted into the hills. Around them laughter echoed, and the land that had once known only sorrow now bloomed with love. In the fading light, the Riggins homestead, now the Hale Ranch, stood tall against the horizon, and for the first time, Dry Creek's wind carried not the ghosts of pain, but the quiet hum of peace.